Thank you, Robin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking a whole day out of your busy life to improve your skills to help others. Turn it on as well, someone tells me. Is that correct? Yeah? Is it on now? Yep, I think I'm on. I have a pretty good volume without this, but yeah. All right. Something tells me that you guys are not in health advocacy because there's a really fat paycheck at the end. But probably you felt a profound responsibility and calling to help others. And you probably also here because you recognize that there is a dire need to help folks navigate this system. You were probably also inspired by something personal that kind of urged you to take action. And that is also why I am here. And we have that in common. I teach mindfulness, resilience, and stress management through lectures, but I also teach yoga. I own Spirit Power Yoga and M3B method. That's my little methodology that I came up with. So why do I do what I do? I was always curious about what makes humans tick. Why do we do the things we do and why do we do them, right? I started my studies with neurobiology and art history. And then just like many of us when we were really young, I had that looming question of what are you going to be when you grow up? And the only thing that I had deep in my gut is I want to figure out this thing called the human condition. So I volunteered in hospitals, figuring, oh, maybe I'm going to become a doctor. And then I worked in a research laboratory for a long time. And one day when I was staring at a cage of B6 mice, I scratched my head and I said, Dora, you are a little bit far away from the human condition. So I went on a binge to figure out what is it that is in my gut that's calling me. And I was studying already yoga because I used to be an athlete, blah, 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 long story, injuries. So I got into yoga. But I also self-educated myself in anything that I could put my hand on, from history, sociology, psychology, philosophy, lots and lots of philosophy and comparative religions. I took courses. I read every book I could possibly find. And then finally I said, I think I have something. And then I had the second problem. I can't find a job. So what do? You open a company and you create a job. And that's what I did. I opened Spirit Power Yoga, and I started teaching yoga through mindfulness and resilience. My goal through my work is to resynthesize the knowledge of sciences and humanities into the wholeness of the human condition. And I am so honored that Kristen allowed me to come here because I believe this is our goal. Our goal today is somehow to resynthesize this knowledge, and we have so many wonderful presenters who are going to enable us to look at our humanity from a bigger picture, okay? Understanding pain, to me, is understanding humanity. Pain is a human condition. And for a long time, we try to solve it with one pill, right? And that's how we got into the trouble of the opiate epidemic. I think we learned that lesson, so we're here to unlearn that. Our perception of pain is unique to an individual's DNA, psychology, social ties, expectations. These all influence how we perceive pain. But, and this is kind of my little thing, I believe pain is also a collective sociocultural economic phenomena. It does not exist just in one person, okay? And I'm very happy to see that the medical system is kind of meeting me here with that again. And I say again because it was not that long ago that philosophy and psychology were the same fields. And it was the scientific method that kind of bifurcated these fields. And the scientific method brought us a whole lot of good. But I think partially why we're struggling with pain is partially this bifurcation, which we're now kind of hugging back in. Oops, this is going to end up in a funny place. We're all good. So science is a wonderful tool, but the human condition cannot be distilled down to one variable, right? That's the scientific method. It exists, therefore, more as a discipline that's also related to history, sociology, and spirituality. And I spent my life figuring this out. Why do we perceive pain differently? And also, more important to us and you guys out here, how do we help unique individuals? So to answer that question, allow me to take you down a little bit of a story of my life. But I want to emphasize that the message is awareness and listening, attentive listening is what is healing. We need to really learn to listen attentively to the patient, okay? So, on to my little story. I'm blessed with two amazing fathers. There's a little bit of age discrepancy, so those of you guys who are doing the calculation, just hang in there. My stepdad was born in 1930 in Budapest, Hungary. That's where I'm from. That's the accent that's going to get a little stronger and stronger as we go along. He was born into a very tight-knit Jewish family, and he had a pretty carefree childhood. Up until about he was 14 years old, that was the time that first he was taken to a work camp and then to Dachau, to a concentration camp. His whole family, with the exception of his father, was killed by the Nazis. When he came back, his father returned, but very ill, and he also lost his brother. His older brother was really, really close to him, and it's something that he constantly recognizes, even into his old age right now, the closeness and the pain that was associated with that loss. He was also the talented kid in the family. You know, the older brother was the one who was just studious and was supposed to be the academic of the family. My stepdad was the guy who skipped school, got in a fight, and came home with probably, scabs on his knees. But history does change who we are. And when he came back, he pivoted towards redirecting himself to studies. And as of now, he's almost 90. He's still writing, not retired. He's written 32 books. He's a historian. He dedicated himself to teaching World War II and that era that followed. And he's kind of unstoppable and joyful. And this is the important part. Despite the pain, despite the suffering, he created a meaningful life for himself. Okay? When he went through physical pain, he usually said something like, look, it's going to hurt either way, so I might as well do something useful. And then when my mother nagged him, which is quite often, I was like, are you in pain? Are you okay? Are you okay? He usually said, of course I'm in pain, and if you keep reminding me if I'm in pain, I'm in worse pain, so could you please stop reminding me? He had this kind of sarcastic, joyous attitude. And those of you guys who study psychology or psychologists know that it's almost like he instinctually figured out ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and cognitive therapy. He recognized his emotions. He was never the think positive kind of guy. No, he deeply, deeply felt about so many sorrows and painful situations. But then he just somehow always knew how to pivot towards like what is useful right now. So that has been one influence in my life. And the other influence is my dear father, who is also a lovely, lovely human being. He was born in 1942 in Budapest. And that was already when there was bombing of the city and starvation and so forth. So my grandma decided to send him to her sister, which is my great aunt, to the countryside, because at least there's food and so forth. And then my grandma ended up having later on in the war a second child. And due to the war conditions, it was a traumatic birth, and he ended up being blind. And as a result, my grandma was a very anxious mother from the get-go. Now, this is also this tiny little woman, but tough as nails. I mean, manual labor all the way, worked in the factories, and then she would go out and cook soup for the men who were rebuilding the city after the war. I mean, she had no respect for laziness at all. Very tough woman, but also very, very kind of hovering kind of mother. My dad turned out to be a very successful person as well. He's an athlete. Went to the Olympics multiple times. Always got the silver medal, which somehow in his mind translated to like, I'm just a loser. I don't know, right? And then, troubles in family and so forth. And even though that he actually engaged in a very successful second relationship after my mother, he also felt like a failure as a human being, as a family man. So one day, and this I remember it accurately because I was a little girl, there was a big commotion. My dad was training, and I don't know if you know fencing. They do these lunges, right? And he was lunging with a heavy weight on his back, and he slipped because he was too fatigued to keep training. He was already pushing where he should have retired, probably active fencing. But anyway, he slipped and he broke his lower back. And then I just remember for weeks he was laying on a floor and he couldn't move. He needed surgery. And we got really lucky because one of his childhood friends was his orthopedic surgeon, and he did a great job. And so everything fused, and because he's just so wicked strong, the muscles held everything, so he never became paralyzed. And then here's where we got lucky again. This friend knew my dad really well, and he knew that my dad had depressive qualities. He tended towards depression, okay? And so he never gave him any pain relief through opiates. Instead, this was the good old days of also house calls. I remember him coming, and my dad was like, Marcus, give me something, it hurts. And he would be like, Bela, of course it hurts. You just had surgery. Suck it up. You're an athlete. So he was kind of jovial, but always very, very alert towards what my dad needed. And then what my dad eventually needed is not to someone to tell him that, look, you're gorgeous, and you're successful, and you just need to buck up. He needed his friend to sit deeply down and recognize my dad's pain, recognize that he felt loss, he felt sorrow, he felt whatever he felt. And then through that, slowly we could encourage him to start doing PT and motion. And this is one of the greatest things that I learned from my dad as I started having health issues later on in life as well. Motion is the lotion. The more you can move, of course, once things heal and you get the green light from your surgery person, but the more you can move, the more you can not only lessen the pain. It's a weird circuitry that you prove it to your mind that despite your pain, you can be a functional and meaningful person in life. And then because of that, your perception of pain lessens, even if the actual pain hasn't lessened. But the motion is such a great thing that eventually you do feel better and better and better. And eventually my dad was able to go back to a successful coaching career, and he finished coaching the Italian team, right? So that leaves me with the question of how come individuals are so different. I think we can all agree that witnessing your race being exterminated is absolutely the worst thing that a human person could survive, right? So there goes my stepdad, upward spiral. We never had to worry about his mind. He somehow was fine after that experience. And there's my dad, and granted, World War II, growing up in communism, not exactly a walk in the park, but it's also not extermination of your race. But he had a really tough time with it. So I was curious. I was really, really curious. And from the story, you already probably noticed that, okay, my stepdad had a relatively carefree childhood, and then he stepped into adversity in teenage years, versus my dad was raised anxious from the get-go. And we all know from science now that how we grew up as young children has an effect on us. But I believe that's just one factor. Okay? The full answer is more complex, and it is not in science, it's not in history, not in sociology, and not in religion, and not in spirituality. I think it's all of it. Okay? Because pain is truly in our head. We live in America that glorifies and sanctifies individualism. The problem with individualism is that it's an illusion even on an individual level. There's just simply nothing separate in our life. Your pain is filtered through your identity. Okay? You're filtering through your identity. Your identity is filtered through your place in history, what culture you live in, what society you live in, where your economic place is in history. There's just absolutely nothing separate in life. So while my stepdad was born with a kind of what I call the lucky side of the cortical lottery, with good DNA to handle adversity, but he was also born into a culture that had hundreds of years of mythos of overcoming adversity. And they had the tools through jokes to kind of teach themselves to spin out of this situation. As my stepdad likes to say, once you survive the absolute worst, every day is a gift. My father was born with maybe the losing side of the cortical DNA game, but he was also raised with an anxious mother from the get-go. His identity is also Hungarian national, which is different than the Jewish national identity. Hungarian nationality, there is a mythos of deep loss in the nation. The myth is we were once powerful 500 years ago, and since then we've been living in servitude to the east or the west. And this deep mythos has a couple of cultural implications that you might have experienced if you traveled to that region of the world. One good thing is everybody is very free to share their vulnerability. If they ask you how you are, they're actually going to tell you how they are. Watch out for that, which allows for deep companionship and friendship, and that has a healing effect as well. But there is a very difficult, how do you pivot out of a loss? Like loss, right? It's hard to pivot out of this to make a meaningful projection for the future. I don't think it's a coincidence that alcoholism is highly prevalent in these cultures, okay? But in order to give the right care in these two different situations, we really had to know that there were different things that mobilized and energized these people. My dad needed deep empathy and then a little bit of exposure therapy. Expose him to the fact that he can move and things are going to be okay. And through that, he got better and better. Now, when my stepdad got injured, and still is the case, because he's an upward spiral guy, what we have to worry about is that he will overdo anything, including the PT. He's like the only guy, because most people, they're too lazy to do their PT. But no, he'll get his exercises and he'll go to a gym and then he'll just beat it for 2 hours. So my mom usually tricks him by, presenting a new book to write or buying an endless number of symphony tickets so that he would just sit and not do anything. Anyway, it gets pretty funny. So in conclusion, we need to understand the relationship to our environment. And of course, we have to be careful not to generalize, because that's racism, right? But I do say that if we refuse to look at our individuality as it relates to our culture and our society, then we are also making a mistake. So what do we do, and what is it that we can do as health advocates? Is that your job is to come from a truly yogic place of not knowing. Not knowing. And what do you do when you don't know? Because you'll never know someone's full story. You'll never know where pain comes from. And you never know and understand the culture, not even if you think you're part of it. You ask questions. And you let your patient talk not only about what physically hurt, but let them know about how's your work? How do you feel about your place in the universe? How are the kids? How's family? You will be able to better handle and direct them towards the right idea, towards what they need to combat pain and adversity if you know the full story, okay? So in order to heal, we must listen, because pain is in our head, and physical pain is often not as physical as we think. The fast pace of life and the rapid growth in science, I think, somehow sidetracked us from this wisdom. It is also the first time in history that we demand a completely pain-free existence. Pain and adversity through literature and any culture, spiritual writing, was the thing that gave us the ability to transcend, to become more meaningful, to live a more fuller life. Pain was our teacher, okay? Now, we want to get rid of pain and be happy. Just open any commercial, okay? The problem is that the more you want to get rid of pain, the more you focus on it, the worse it gets. And the more you want to get happy, the more you get into addictive substances. Whether that's shopping, extreme versions of exercise, or it is a pharmacological, okay? That kind of chase leads to addiction. So I am not saying that we need to go back to Civil War era and give the spatula into the mouth and a glass of whiskey before surgery. Things have a place. So you need pharmacology, you need anesthetics, these things have place. But we cannot have a pain-free life. Nobody can have a pain-free life. Part of our education is to somehow re-educate our expectation that certain amount of pain is part of life, and then now how do we pivot to make it meaningful? And this is my tough love that I give my students sometimes, but I'm going to give you a little tough love. It's okay. Here it goes. A life of pure happiness and carefree freedom is a worthless existence. It's empty, narcissistic space, and I think if we keep going down that road, it will collapse the civilization. So, life without adversity and moral achievement is not really a worthwhile life. So what are we after as scientists? Here we go, post-traumatic growth. There we go. We can all get that. So, instead of knowing what to do, let's listen. Allow your patients to tell you everything. Do the deep listening. So sometimes with short appointments, that's not possible, but as a health advocate, you can pick up where the system fails here, and you can really let that listening to happen. And then you can pick from the arsenal that we're going to present you today. You're going to learn so many tools, right? Do you need a medical treatment? Do you need psychology with cognitive therapy, ACT, acceptance, commitment therapy? That's my love. Motion therapy, which you'll learn from me. We'll present you so many other things today. But remember, these are tools. Don't fall trapped to the one-size-fits-all thing, right? Let your patient guide you to what to do. And remember to always listen. So thank you very much.